Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I'm going to answer the question of how can you tell if you are actually making gains on your program. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And this is one of these interesting topics because you see so much bro science and everything here on YouTube Fitness and everything else. And the other problem we have is that so many people suffer from body image dysmorphia to some extent, a greater or lesser extent, that most of you out there can't tell when you look in the mirror if you're making gains or not. You might look at a muscle. I have people all the time who say, oh, I took out this exercise and I noticed my traps start shrinking. It's like there's no way. There's no way if you continue to do big compound movements that you took out one exercise that isn't even that particularly amazing for traps in some of these cases, and they started visibly shrinking, but you were still doing multiple big compound movements and hit the muscle. People will say silly stuff like that. I did this and my arms started shrinking. And usually, you'll ask them the time frame, and it's at a much faster rate. Like they would have to actually literally quit training completely to have noticed the amount of muscle loss that they claim to have noticed in the mirror in that time frame. So people need to understand it from that perspective. People have a very skewed image of themselves. And the same thing, people are like, well, I'm gaining weight and I just seem to be getting fatter. I don't see any muscle growth. Which again, we come back to the point, and this is why you can't use your self-perception there. You need quantifiable metrics here. And the reason you can't do that, does anyone realize that it's almost impossible to not gain muscle when you gain body fat? When people overfeed and gain body fat, even while sitting around not training, they gain muscle. Food is anabolic. In other words, you don't gain fat while gaining zero muscle. You can't put on 10 pounds of body fat over the course of time and gain 0 ounces of muscle mass with it. It doesn't work that way. Again, someone who doesn't even train will gain muscle when they gain body fat. It will be a very small ratio, meaning that their fat gains are going to dramatically exceed their muscle gains. But hopefully people understand the point of that. So when someone says something as silly as, I'm actually training and I've been bulking and I'm not gaining any muscle, it's just fat. You know how ludicrous that is biologically? It's not even possible. Especially if you've been actually lifting weights. It can't happen. Barring maybe a protein deficiency, what are you eating, a 95% fat diet? It would be the only possible explanation. The most extreme keto diet anyone's ever come up with. But if you're getting, even a reasonably sufficient amount of protein, you're going to gain muscle while overeating. And particularly when you're training. So the problem we run into is, what is our quantifiable metric for this? And it's going to be based upon performance. Because most people can't afford to get a DEXA scan every 2, 3, 4 weeks, right? You're not going to go in and get a DEXA scan to see if your program is working. Aha, I gained exactly 1/4 pound of muscle this month. You're not going to be able to visually see that. Again, barring getting a DEXA scan, and we could argue the DEXA scan could easily be off by 1 pound of muscle. Well, that makes it almost useless on a month-to-month basis even then. Well, when we go back and look at all the data, when I talk about size equaling strength, that's not really a controversial statement, right? That's only a controversial statement in the bodybuilding world. It's not a controversial statement in the scientific world. It's not. If your performance goes up and your strength goes up on exercises, you almost certainly gained muscle mass in the muscles that are being worked, or at least the primary movers. You gained muscle somewhere for an exercise to go up, unless it was a brand new exercise and you have new neural adaptations. And when I say the lift goes up, I mean using the same technique, form, range of motion. I don't mean that your lift went up because you cheated or cut the range of motion or adjust your grip or whatever. I mean, did it legitimately go up? And does that mean 1 rep max? No, it means anything. And this is our quantifiable measurement of gains, of muscle growth, of any of that based upon your training. And this gets confusing. If you're running like block periodization, you actually won't know. You won't know until 12 weeks if you gained anything, will you? Like, let's say you run something like my intermediate program? Well, I would say to you, if you gained any body weight and you ran the program as written, you certainly gained muscle, but you don't have a measurement of it outside of trusting someone else who wrote the program. You don't have a measurement for it outside of that. So if you want a quantifiable way to tell if you gained muscle, you need to look at your performance. And for a lot of people, it's the adjustment back and forth. And it gets tricky when you rotate through rep ranges, when you rotate through volume, intensity. It can become difficult. So all you can do realistically is at any given time, you can track your rep maxes and see how they stack up on a calculator against your 1 rep max. And if you're seeing any upward trend, you are probably gaining muscle. In other words, it's going to get a little tricky if you're doing 3 rep squats 1 week, 5 reps another, and 10 the next. It's going to get really tricky tracking that. But what you can look at is the different exercises and see how they've increased. And if you want to know kind of how the ratios are going, you'll have to look at your different big movements that are working certain muscles. You're going to need to look at the big movements. Because a lot of people say, okay, well, I mean, obviously I've looked at my bench training and my 8 rep max went up on my bench. I was benching 185 for 8, and then the next time later when I went back over to 8 rep sets, I'm able to do 205 for 8 reps or 195 for 8 reps. I've gained 10 pounds on that exercise, right? So the question might become, how much of it has been chest, how much of it's been delt, how much of it's been tricep. Well, that's going to be harder to say, isn't it? You're going to need other exercises to assess that. But you probably gained muscle in all the primary movers, because you are now able to create more tension and do more work in a given number of sets and reps. You're doing more work with the same muscles. They have probably hypertrophied. They've probably all 3 grown. You've probably seen growth in your pecs, your triceps, your anterior deltoids. It's almost certain you've seen growth in all 3. You're not going to know how much it is in each one. I would say until you try a different exercise. Maybe go assess how your standing press has gone. And I don't mean people say, oh, my seat and my dumbbells, because that's an ambiguous range of motion, right? That is an ambiguous range of motion exercise with other deviations that can really affect how much weight you lift, how much you let your hands drift out. I'm talking exercises where it's easier to assess range of motion, easier to assess the bar path, like the press, for example. Look and see, did your press go up? What proportion or percentage did your press go up relative to, say, your bench press or your weighted dip or whatever? And if it increased more, you can assume probably a little more delt and tricep. And if it increased less, you can assume that your chest probably got more of the growth. And that's how you can assess these things. Whereas, maybe one of them didn't go up at all. Well, that probably the muscles associated with that grew very, very minimally. But what people need to remember, just because it hasn't been a measurable performance increase, didn't mean that those muscles didn't grow a little bit. It just means that it's going to be a really insignificant amount. But they still probably made gains, and that adds up over time. In other words, you can't come in and train a big exercise like the standing barbell press. And let's say it goes up really, really slow over a couple years. You're still going to see substantial growth in all those muscles, even if it's a very, very slow increase. And it might take a very long time. But you're still training those muscles with a big, heavy, effective exercise. And so you can really look at it from that perspective. And you need to maybe break some of that down and look to see how the different muscles, maybe how they're growing based upon how the exercises that target those a little more, how they have improved over time. That's a very, very good metric for it. And that's why I tell people, track your stuff. Don't come in and just do random stuff. You need to keep track of it. You probably need to know what you can do for your 5s or 8s or everything on your big lifts, and then you can kind of keep track of where your strengths and weaknesses are, what muscles are growing and which ones aren't, if you care about that. Some people just care about their performance, but what I would say to you is your other lifts, even tracking your accessory movements if you're a strength athlete, can give you a very, very good idea of which muscles might be your weaker links in your kinetic chain on different movements, right? So it applies to you guys also, because there is going to be a hypertrophy component for that. We all know that if you need more tricep strength for an exercise, we all know that getting your triceps bigger is the key to that, right? Because everything else is neural efficiency. Everything else is neuromuscular efficiency and technique. You need bigger triceps. It's not rocket science at that point. And as a little side caveat, this is the problem with trying to confuse muscles. This is the problem with rotating exercises too often, isn't it? Unless you have a systematic way of doing it. I know people say, well, the West Side guys, they try. Yeah, that's true. The West Side guys, every time they do an exercise, they intend to PR, and if they don't, there's a problem. But yeah, they do rotate through max effort exercises, and they don't repeat the same exercise more than once every 6 weeks. But here's what I would say to a lot of people. You better know what the hell you're doing when you start doing stuff like that. There have been certain YouTubers and then a lot of their followers who try to use protocols like that, and they really may not know what they're doing with it, and they could get very lackluster results because they're always detrained on their lifts. Not an ideal situation unless you really know how to train and program. And I would say to people, if you're going to run a system like that, you better have someone with 20, 30 years of coaching having taught you how to do it. It would be my advice. Otherwise, that's not going to work. In other words, randomly changing exercises all the time, boy, bodybuilders do it. That only works because those guys are on a lot of drugs. You are going to see very, very slow results doing that, and you're not going to be able to really track your progress. So it is important that you have some consistency in exercises if you even want to know if you're progressing or not, because it is going to be based on performance. In other words, you don't add 10 or 20 pounds to your 5 or 8 rep or 10 rep max on a big exercise unless you just started doing it. In other words, it's a new movement, and then you have neural gains, neuromuscular efficiency and motor patterns and everything. But if it's a lift you've already established a baseline with, and you see that it is almost impossible that all the muscles involved didn't see at least some muscle growth. So performance is your metric that you can measure objectively without trying to use the mirror and our own delusions of what we tell ourselves to track your progress and to see if you're actually making gains. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.